Hello, Ellen. Welcome to Potterwatch.
Hi, Holly.
Can you tell the students who you are?
Sure. I'm Ellen Andersen. I am an associate professor of political science and also of gender, sexuality, and women's studies.
And what question have you brought to us today, Ellen?
Well, it's a question near and dear to my heart because it's about government in Harry Potter. And so the question that I'm bringing is, what kind of a government do wizards have? And what does this say about wizard society? I mean, I can add on to that into say, like, is there anything about the government in Harry Potter that we as Muggles should find useful, laudable, something that we might say normatively is a good system that produces democratic outcomes.
All right. Wow. So what is your answer?
Harry Potter's government sucks.
Oh,
it really does. I mean, so you gotta be willing to go dive into these books a little bit and think a little bit about sort of what you can pull from 4 and 5 and stick together. But as near as I have figured out, as I have sort of contemplated this, you have the Ministry of Magic. Everybody knows that. The Ministry of Magic appears to be run by a minister of magic. Apparently there's only one minister. So the minister is, and throughout the book we only see male ministers, although apparently in some of the, like the Pottermore writings and things around it, there's indications that there have been female ministers, but I'm going to go ahead and use a male pronoun for talking about this because we have several ministers that sort of float and around. So there's only one minister, which is just sort of weird. Like one would expect there to be multiple ministers in a ministry, and maybe a chief minister or say a prime minister if you're sitting in England. But so there is a minister of magic, and we know about that. There is clearly a lot of bureaucracy. So we know that there's the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. There's something about a department that's about underage magic. There's magical games and sports.
The prime job opportunity for a student out of Hogwarts is to be employed by the ministry.
Yes, right. And so there's a lot of bureaucracy. Now, I, as a political scientist, I'm 100% a fan of bureaucracy, right? Which is to say, bureaucracies are the administrators of law, right? So when you have your lawmaking body, hold on to that thought for a second. You have a lawmaking body and it passes some kind of law, then somebody actually has to take this text on a page or orally, whatever, and translate it to make it functional. So bureaucrats, they are administering law or enforcing law. So cops are street level bureaucrats. So is the FBI. They are writing regulations designed to operationalize stuff, and they are doing sort of policy and program review. Right? And all of those features are actually really good features. Now we can talk about stuff being too rule bound. We can all have conversations about sort of bureaucracies run amok. But the scope of like a part of your government is designed to make sure that the stuff that is passed by some legislative body sort of like takes root and grows, or a different metaphor, is like is anchored into something, right? So if you pass a law that says, as we did a few years ago here in Burlington, that the speed limit throughout the city was going to be 25 miles an hour. Okay, city council went off and did that, but like somebody's got to like get the new signs. and arrange for the new signs to get put up. Like all of this is like, it sounds boring, but it's really important to making government work. So we are filled with bureaucracy. And apparently there's a lot of law, but I can't figure out who makes the law.
There is no legislative body.
There is, and I'm gonna screw this up because I only remember it from the books. I know we saw it in movies 4 and 5, but there's the Wizengamot. I have no idea how you actually say that, so I'm just
Wizengamot, but I don't have any.
Wizengamot, sure.
That's right either. That's just what I said.
Say it with some authority, and I'll follow you on this.
Wizengamot. Okay,
so we know that exists, and it is apparently a judicial body. And we know that it has a bunch of members of it who look like they act as a jury.
In Harry's disciplinary hearing, they're definitely there as a jury.
So we have a minister, we have a lot of bureaucracy, and I think we have a judiciary of some sort. Although, for a while, for quite a while, how did you say that word again?
I said Wizengamot.
Wizengamot. Okay. For quite some time, Dumbledore is the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, mind you, while he's being the headmaster.
Sorry.
Yep. We okay?
Yep, carry on.
So mind you, he's got a full-time job, and he's got this other, it sounds like it's a big job, right? But when he is removed, again, by some kind of opaque process, the minister steps in. So now you have a minister, invisible lawmaking body. You have a judiciary, which has some features that should feel pretty similar, right? So there is, like there's a prosecutor. The way that the judges / jury interrogate themselves, that's not an American standard, but there are certainly plenty of courts that are sort of informational that way, and they're not adversarial. The idea is if we just cover enough information, we'll figure out the answer. Okay. So there's some judging going there, although I have a whole bunch of things to say about the judging. Let's go back to our first minister. So our first minister apparently can just step in and be like the chief judge. Suggested that the Wizengamot, how'd I do?
That's cool. Yeah. Again, we made this up.
All right. Might be like the House of Lords. So that, and the House of Lords is simultaneously a legislative body and a judicial body. Except that, like, it's judicial body stuff, it only gets the really big cases, right? Almost all judicial disputes are decided well below showing up at the House of Lords. And that's true of our Supreme Court too. So, all right.
And Mr. Weasley does seem very surprised that Harry was tried in front of the Wizengamot. That seems to be an unusual move. So maybe they do normally get the big ones.
Well, and it is the case that, like, Harry thinks he's going to be heard by one member of the Wizengamot. Sorry, I can't do it. We'll just forge ahead. Right, so it seems like maybe by one judgy type person. But we never see or hear them talking about making laws at all. In fact, the one time we know two things about laws. We know that Dolores Umbridge is the author of the essentially the Let's Discriminate Against Werewolves law.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that Arthur Weasley wrote the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts law, right? And it's this kind of jokey sort of thing because he makes sure that he can still magic up his favorite Muggle car.
Mm-hmm.
Like he writes a loophole in. So bureaucrats don't usually write laws. They operationalize laws, but they don't write laws.
Mm-hmm.
So I have no idea where these laws are coming from. But I'm really certain that the minister does not have any real constraints on his power, that he is in fact an authoritarian despot while he's ruling. And maybe you get the kind of benevolent dictator, like everybody wants Dumbledore at some point to be the minister, and I think the assumption is he would be benevolent, but he's a freaking dictator. So that you get things like the first minister is putting pressure on the press.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so much for any sort of free speech guarantee, right? That's not happening. There's stuff that's normal, right? The notion that the minister covers up the mass breakout from Azkaban, like, yeah, governments cover up stuff that embarrasses them, like that's normal. The fact that the minister himself is involved in the attempt to arrest Dumbledore,
mm-hmm.
What? All right. Later on, when Fudge is long since gone, and now we've got Scrimgeour, right? He is just fixated on the contents of Dumbledore's will, right? And apparently he's allowed to hold on to the contents of the will for 30 days. So we have the minister of an entire nation of wizards who also does will administration. I mean, this makes no sense, right? He also leads arrests, right? He's there in the attempt to arrest Dumbledore,
mm-hmm.
right? He has the power to make Dolores Umbridge the new Defense Against Dark Arts instructor, which I guess means that Hogwarts is a state school.
Apparently. And then, I mean, the decrees get increasingly bizarre from there.
Well, right, because then she gets to be on a high, because that's the kind of thing you normally see in democracies, right?
Just an inquisitorial squad made up of children.
Right? And then she becomes like the headmistress, right? So this chief minister, this only minister, like, I see no constraints on his power. He is worried about public opinion.
Very worried. That's the main thing he's worried about.
So that suggests that he's elected, mm-hmm. and can sort of be deposed. So, okay, so there are elections. We don't see any of them. We see several new ministers, but we don't see any election. And okay, like maybe, Rowling just didn't want to write about elections. Fair, but she's written a lot about government.
Mm-hmm.
But we do know, and we know this early because it's something that Hagrid says early on. Which is, there are at least times when instead of selecting a minister through election, like, they just name one. Right? And that's why they want Dumbledore. Who's they? That's my exact question. Like, who is the they who chooses this?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So.
Well, and we know that Barty Crouch Sr. was sort of like on track to become minister until this thing happened with his son, and then it sort of passed on to Fudge. But again, who makes those decisions?
Who makes those decisions? Right? If we're thinking about limited government, right? And so part of the core idea of democracy, the way we talk about it now, is popular sovereignty, majority rule with protection of fundamental minority rights. And that's the modern definition. All right, so that governments are limited in important ways that are necessary to ensure liberty. So let's think about what kind of rights people have. Clearly, there's no right to a free press. There's obviously no right to a fair trial.
I mean,
the dementors are in the freaking courtroom, sucking the joy out of everyone.
Hagrid is sent to Azkaban as a precaution in book 2. And don't worry, we'll let you out with an apology if we catch whoever opened the Chamber of Secrets.
Sirius is sent to Azkaban without a trial, right? Where everyone is tortured, right? No matter what. Apparently, there's only one prison.
We see people sent there for like a 6-month sentence.
Yeah,
but we also know that they go insane within a month.
Right. So the only apparently sort of the only penalty for criming appears to be torture and insanity. All right. But when Sirius escapes, so one of the interesting things about book 3, like Sirius escapes, Fudge is like crazy upset. He unilaterally gives the Dementors permission to do the kiss of death. Right? So he's just unilaterally changed this dude's sentence without any kind of judiciary intervening. I mean, we're looking at dictatorship functionally. I mean, again, apparently this dictator cares about
popular opinion.
Popular opinion. I'm not entirely certain why, although it's certainly the case like Fudge just gets fired. By whom? Like, if you're having an election, like, was there some sort of impeachment process? I mean, I have no idea. Like, he's just sort of fired, and then like we get these string of like other ministers that come in, right? So when I think about the fact of that there might be limits on this government and that people might have rights, right? I don't really see any of that happening. But I do see a government that is very, very interested in engaging in a certain kind of wizard supremacy, right? And it's not just the bad guys who are engaged in wizard supremacy, right? So you can think about the what was it, that act of the Muggle-born Registration Act. I mean, by this point, we're supposed to think this government is awful, right? I mean, that's part of the point. She's making an argument in this book about sort of the fallibility of government and how you can't trust it. It's a very libertarian argument. But way before that, giants, centaurs, freaking house elves, right? It's a little slavery among friends. Giant centaurs, well, muggles, muggle-borns,
werewolves,
squibs. Right? There are all of these sort of legally inferior people and species. And you might argue that squibs they're not by law prevented from doing anything. So maybe I shouldn't put squibs in there. Like, squibs apparently just largely end up living with muggles.
I don't think they're not accepted at Hogwarts, which we said is a state school. They don't have enough magic to go to school.
Yeah, well, that's true. Well, fair enough. That is, and I missed that. So that is a really good point. I'm sorry, you can't get this education.
Which seems like a pretty fundamental way to exclude them from society thereafter.
Yeah, right. So there is nothing about this government that I think we should ever have thought was valuable. So we know, so the government is apparently set up to just keep magic invisible from the muggles. That actually seems like a perfectly reasonable way. Although I would think that the primary purpose of your government would be to govern your own people, and that part of the principle of that might be, for our safety, we have to remain invisible to the muggles, and perhaps for their safety as well. Mm-hmm. All right, so I can buy that as a really important premise of why government exists. Like, there's a foundational premise for why government has to exist here, which is you've got to keep a secret from the muggles, and if we just let sort of wizards and whatnot go off and do their whole thing, they'll blow this in a heartbeat. Yeah, I'll buy that. You know, here's a reason. But they're not. There's a little bit of keeping it invisible from muggles that we see from this government, but that doesn't seem to be the mainstay of their existence at all. Right? So, I mean, this can't functionally be a democracy. It's just not.
No.
There's no popular sovereignty. Not if people get, assuming that there are elections, I mean, not if people get to, like, vote for the minister, but only when there aren't important things going on. When there's a really important thing going on, we will just install a minister, right? There's not, like, decisions that are being made are not being made courtesy of the people in any way, shape, or form that we can tell. I mean, this really is bureaucrats gone wild. If bureaucrats are just writing laws.
So I have a question for you. We talked in class a little bit about the ways that the aesthetic of the Wizarding World and also the economic system of the Wizarding World suggest a pre-industrial revolution kind of era. Would you say that that's in keeping with the government as well?
Well, were that the case, I would actually be expecting it to be a monarchy of sorts. We know it's not a monarchy, so ergo it's a republic. Because, like, in one way of thinking about things, like, a republic just means not a monarchy. Mm-hmm. All right, so it's a republic. So pre-industrial revolution, we don't, like, there are not a whole heck of a lot of republics out there. There is sort of functionally the United States and France. Mm-hmm. In the part of the world that we would call sort of the industrialized democracy part of the world, that, like, the people who are probably the most were envisioned as the readers of this book. Mm. And so in a pre-industrial era, government, you don't actually have to do a lot of governing. You have to be able to repel invaders. You have to be able to tax enough. We have no idea how taxation works. You have to be able to tax enough so that you have income. Seen as promoting some sort of basic justice, although many a ruler has not done that and gone just fine. But one of the reasons that criminal penalties tended to be so harsh in pre-industrial era societies is because it was really hard to catch people who are committing crimes. And so you had to make a spectacle out of those folks. So maybe you could argue that Azkaban is a spectacle, but it's not really. Right? Because it's not like we get to watch. It's not like we get to have this, like, TV insert into people being miserable in Azkaban. So, and there's bureaucracy out the wazoo, right? That's not pre-industrial government. Right? Bureaucrats show up to do stuff because government is lawmaking, it's policy making, and somebody's got to figure out how to ensure that the laws are being followed, right? How to operationalize the laws. Like, so there's tons of bureaucracy right? Which is completely counter to any sort of pre-industrial.
Could we see the bureaucracy as a form of the minister who's in power wants to keep on the good side of the people by employing as many of their relatives as possible in some sort of favor system?
Sure, but then I really want to know where the money's coming from.
Right. Yeah.
Right, because if you're deliberately employing people, how are you paying them with what? I mean, we know that the Weasleys are not very well off, right?
Which is something that we talked about in class as to how the text actually kind of hedges on that. They do a lot of telling us that they're poor, but they show us a mostly middle class family.
Well, it's the middle class family, but it is middle class family where, you know, Christmas gifts, are, they're made with more love than with style.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely evidence on both sides, but we've sort of talked about the ways that this is necessary for them to be poor for the narrative more so than actually reality would suggest. And so there's these very heavy-handed reminders that they are poor,
like Ron's crappy robes, right? And that Ron has to have scabbers, right?
Or other people have pets who are not Death Eaters.
Yes, other people have pets who are not Death Eaters. So, I mean, from my vaunted status as a political scientist, like, this government makes no sense. It doesn't make sense in terms of fitting into any sort of pre-industrial space. It reads like it's like a fascist government, because you know where there's a lot of bureaucracy? In fascist governments. We know that there are no apparent limits on the power of the minister, although the minister fears being removed. Now, we've never seen a minister actually voted out, but we have definitely seen ministers be deposed, right? So that's a marker of sort of authoritarian systems, where one of the great fears is sort of being deposed from your position. And maybe this is all I don't know, a plug for libertarianism or anarchism. But fundamentally, like, this is like, the only thing good that you can say about this government is that it does eventually sort of fight against the Death Eaters, right? Who are explicitly eugenic. I mean, they're also Death Eaters, but they're explicitly eugenic. So the Ministry of Magic is in fact, fighting against eugenic principles. So I will give them that.
That's a very low bar.
Right. But beyond that, I don't see that there is any evidence that this government is good, or that it strives to be good, or that it strives to promote goodness in any manner that muggles like us would recognize.